From B Media Production, this is B Podcasting. Engage your audience with podcasts.
Hi and welcome to episode 12. I'm Nick Schildberger. This episode we hear from former Fairfax journalist Peter Gearin, who's founded his own online magazine on branded content called Brand Tales.
Content marketing is something that demands a full-on approach. You either commit to it entirely or you shouldn't bother at all.
That's Peter Gearin a little later. But now I'd like to welcome my co-host and podcast aficionado, Chris Ashmore.
Hello, Nick. Do you feel recently there's been this huge amount of momentum all of a sudden in podcasting?
Yeah, I think it's building week on week.
It's been incredible. I mean, just from our point of view, we're getting inquiries left, right and centre now from all sorts of people, consultants, big business, small business, not-for-profits, member associations, and they're all trying to work out, A, whether it's something they want to get into, and B, how do they do it? And I'm not just saying all this to toot our own horn, or perhaps I am, but it's soon to become something which, if you're not doing it, then you're in the minority.
Yeah, I think I say to people there's a real buzz around podcasting at the moment and that's why we're here, because we're a production house and we want to produce really high quality podcasts, and I guess a little bit more self-promotion there. But one of the reasons why we are good at podcasting is because we have journalists on our team, and that's a good segue into introducing our executive producer here at B Media Production, Heather Dawson, to the studio for the first time. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Nick. Hello, Chris.
Heather, you've been with B Media Production for, am I allowed to say, 2 decades? And before that, a background at the BBC and the ABC.
Well, oh my God, Nick, you don't need to remind me how long I've been here. It has been quite a while, actually, probably since the days of Job. But it's lovely to be in the studio with you two guys for a change, and I've really been enjoying the podcasting series. It's been really good. Okay, so just a pocket history of my background in the media, because it kind of has relevance given our chat with Peter Gearin this week. So I started out at the BBC in London. I worked there for 7 years as a producer for a very successful morning current affairs programme. A couple of years at Radio Television Hong Kong in the newsroom there. That taught me an awful lot about working very hard, very fast, but a lot of fun. Then to ABC Radio in Melbourne, working to produce your dad's morning programme, Nick.
A tough boss, I hear.
Shocker. No, he was great. And from there to BE, where I've fallen into this wonderful, interesting world of interviewing amazing people. You know, it's been fantastic, creating programmes and podcasts, editing, writing, and making everything as engaging, as succinct and as valuable as possible. Because, let's face it, it's all about quality content these days, isn't it, guys?
Well, it is, isn't it? And this background in journalism, Heather, it all helps with being able to provide polished content, polished podcast content. And that's the chat you had with our guest this episode?
That's right. Well, Peter Gearin was senior editor at the Sydney Morning Herald and the Sun Herald in Sydney. He too, like me, spent years working in mainstream journalism. In fact, he calls himself an old-time journo, and I do the same thing now these days. But the thing is, these careers that I've had, and certainly Peter's had, to bring experience, hopefully of the best kind of experience, to this whole new interesting area of branded content. And this is where Peter is now. He's got his online magazine, Brand Tales, which helps business owners and marketers better understand the art of quality, authentic storytelling and producing valuable and relevant content, which is really what journos always want to do. You know, the best journos really know how to tell good stories. So if you're ready, let's have a listen to what Peter has to say. And I ask him, first of all, how he defines content marketing and why companies should embrace it.
Well, Heather, for something that's been around for quite a long time, I think content marketing's been fairly misunderstood. I define it as relevant or useful content that is created by businesses themselves for a clearly defined audience. And it's also produced regularly, usually on their own publishing platform. And throw in all those different components, and I think you can see why there's a lot of confusion as to why people kind of don't really know how to say what actual content marketing is. I think, you know, it can be a blog, it can be a weekly video series, it can be a podcast, of course. It really depends on where the customers are. But the main thing is it needs to focus on the audience, it needs to be audience-centric. So whether the content's basic or funny or thought-provoking, It has to be something that appeals to a target market, not just something that sells a product or a service. And the one thing I think it cannot definitely be is a piece of advertising or part of a campaign or a social media post. It has to be much more deliberate than that. It needs to be almost an ongoing business philosophy that's planned carefully, that everyone's on board, including the company boss. And it's also got to be a massive commitment. It can take many months or years before any real benefits can be tracked properly. So it's not for every business, and those businesses that are quite impatient can give up very quickly because they don't see any immediate results. But in the end, what good content marketing does is help build credibility, awareness, and trust over time. And then you hope that the audience that actually is listening to you will eventually reward you with their business.
One area of concern to companies that may be thinking about it, though, is how you measure the impact of content marketing. Is that a bit of an issue, do you think? How do you measure it?
I think it's, of course, an issue because of that problem, I guess, of how do you find immediate return on investment on something that takes a very long time to establish. And there also really isn't one set metric that shows you if the strategy is working or not. But that doesn't mean that content marketing isn't having an impact, of course. It just really depends on what the business is actually trying to achieve. I don't think it's just about attracting likes or shares on social media or web views. Engagement metrics can be very useful, of course, but I think the most important measurement is probably the hardest ones to define, and they're the ones such as, are prospective customers more likely to believe in what you say or want to do business with you, even if they're not ready to buy right now? So I think that any metric that measures trust and authority are really important when it comes to getting results from content.
Do you think Australian businesses are doing content marketing well?
I think on the whole, we're still finding our feet compared with businesses in other countries. I think there are certain segments that are doing it better than others. One in particular, tourism and travel organisations seem to have a good handle on what's needed. Tourism Australia with Australia.com is now focusing on experiences rather than just destinations, and I think that it's leading the way. The financial industry is also doing some good, effective content marketing as well. The one that's often cited is ANZ and its Blue Notes site, which has the latest news, information, commentary on financial services. And I think that Telstra's innovation site, Insight, is also pretty good. But the one that's probably gets the gold star is health insurance companies, of all things. Bupa has had a site called The Blue Room for the last couple of years, and they do some great stories on parenting and nutrition and health advice. And just recently, HBF came up with a site called Direct Advice for Dads, which has practical tips and tricks and things for fathers. And it's just fascinating because you look at health insurance companies and you think, well, what would they possibly do in content? It's not likely they're about to produce a blog that explains how the Medicare rebate works or anything like that. So what they've done, they've found a way of trying to reach their audience, which is trying to fill a hole in a publishing market where they get information about something which they actually can need. And that's exactly the sort of thing that content marketing in an environment such as that, where it's very well resourced, can actually make a really big difference.
Well, you referred to this just now, but, it's not so easy for some companies to get their minds around how to create content. But there's also the question of keeping on creating it as well, isn't there? That's also not easy.
Yeah, it comes down to having the right people in the right place to produce the material for the right audience. And that can be tricky for those who are just getting into the game or who aren't used to having that kind of mindset. I'm actually a massive fan of brand newsrooms, which is a fairly new concept, probably in a global sense, not just in Australia, but they do exist here. And it might be because I'm an old-time journo, but I like the idea of a newsroom approach where you generate ideas and create useful and relevant content around a structure, and you plan it, and you ensure the right people are in the right place to produce what's needed, and you have deadlines set so that you know when they're going to be published. It's not really about businesses here setting up massive teams of journalists over a floor of corporate headquarters and writing or broadcasting stories every day. But I can certainly see a time when even quite small Australian businesses will have people on staff or experienced teams who are outsourced, who are generating consistently good content as part of their marketing strategies. And one way to do that is through having a newsroom style approach. I think, from what I've seen, many marketers in Australia still prefer to work on campaigns rather than produce material consistently over a long period that's going to help build or maintain awareness and engagement. And I think a lot of that's probably through that sense of a lack of patience, not willing to invest in something for the long term. They just feel they need to get a result straight away, or certainly within the next quarter or next year. And I think that if the current and future of marketing is about providing worthwhile experiences for their customers, then I think providing useful and relevant content has to be part of any marketing mix.
Well, let's talk about podcasts, Peter. Why do you think podcasts are such a good medium for content marketing and building engagement?
I think it's because they're so intimate. The voice is such a powerful instrument. You get to know the people behind the voices in a much more effective way than just reading the words that people write. I think there's just an inherent trust that comes from words being spoken rather than written. And when it comes to content marketing, I really believe in the concept of sincerity rather than authenticity. I know it's a subtle difference, but I think sincerity is about being honest and truthful in yourself and not trying to sound like what you think you should be. And I think podcasts give people a much better idea of who you really are. I think this is especially the case in businesses that offer like personal services such as PR or communications or maybe even plumbers or builders. People want to know who you are. Would I want to work with that person? Are you someone I can trust? And I think podcasts give you a much greater sense of really understanding where someone comes from. I think in many ways, though, that there aren't that many fantastic examples of Australian content marketing being done as podcasts at the moment. Maybe this one here is an exception, but I think there aren't that many brands who are kind of really getting involved in it in any major way. There's one outstanding example from last year, which was the one that I know you've heard of, which is Decoding Genius, which was something that GE and Fairfax combined to produce last year. And it was really great. It was a fantastic series, but it only went for 6 episodes. So effectively, they built this fantastic, engaged audience on the back of this great series, and then they just let them wander the streets. And I think businesses are missing a great opportunity to connect with target audiences using podcasts if they can actually build a podcast and then let their audience go quite as easily as that.
Well, how does a company ensure it's producing quality content?
Well, I think any good content marketing approach has to fit in with a company strategy. It needs to then also have a content strategy. And I think in the end, it needs to reflect what the company actually stands for. It gets back to, to the idea that content needs to be relevant for a target audience, but it also needs to make sense for the company in the first place to produce content that makes sense. So for Bupa, it makes perfect sense to me to produce a website devoted to health and nutrition and not about financial advice. I think businesses need to be clear on what they're trying to achieve with their content, and they also need to be clear on how they want to be seen. So, do they want to be an authority figure like ANZ, or do they want to be like a guiding hand like Tourism Australia? I think in the end, producing great content is about doing what you can do well. I don't agree at all with the idea that marketers should try lots of different things and see which one works. I'd prefer if a business just stuck to one platform, whether it be a website or a podcast, and produced editorial style work that's just really good. I don't think there are any shortcuts in the end when it comes to producing quality content. I think you have to have a good strategy, good ideas, good content providers, people with a good level of experience. You also need to promote it really well once it's done, but I guess amplification is another topic altogether.
Well, Peter, as a former journalist, and now you're totally immersed in this whole area of content marketing, producing good content. Do you think marketers are just starting to pick up their ears to understand what content marketing is really all about?
I think it's been one of those terms that they are curious about and have probably heard how hard it is to do well. And so there's been a reticence to really dive in. But that, in a way, is the worst of all cases. I think content marketing is something that demands a full-on approach. You either commit to it entirely or you shouldn't bother at all. And the ones who I think have been burnt so far have been those companies that have tried a little bit to do it, have done a pilot study, done it for 3 months, and then found that really didn't move the needle too much. So let's just move our marketing budget or whatever budget onto something else. When really it is a long haul game. It's something that people need to commit to for a long time with a full strategy ahead of it. So it is something that I know a lot of people are very curious about and are very keen to know more about, and probably would like to have a box they could just open and just make it happen. But it just doesn't work like that. It takes a lot of commitment.
That was Peter Gearin, and plenty of interesting things to say. Didn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I particularly like his story around brand newsrooms and how brands should look to create what he calls a brand newsroom. Incidentally, the podcast that Lush do is called Brand Newsroom, I think, Chris, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Probably no coincidence there. But it's all about creating content as a major part of the business, which means having the structure and the planning and, importantly, the right people. And I want to get to that right people part because he's not saying you need to create a media department to compete with the likes of News Corp, but he is saying that, and I guess coming from a journalistic background, that having journalists working with marketers to create the content makes a lot of sense. I know, Heather, you're here as a journalist, but you've also spent a lot of time working with our clients over the years and quite often working with the marketing department. So how have you found that relationship?
Look, sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's a little bit checkered, not so good. Marketers, in my opinion, looking back over time, and I hope it's changing now, sometimes directed by two things. One is the immediate campaign, or the next best campaign, and return on investment. And they are limited edition things. And when it comes to content marketing, we know from Peter Gearin, we know from other people that you've spoken to on these podcasts, that it's an ongoing long-haul strategy and doesn't always fall so easily inside a marketer's brain. Hopefully that's changing, that marketers will see that content marketing can and should become an intrinsic part of the bigger umbrella of a marketing department. Of course, they have to still cope with this issue of return on investment. It's not easy, is it, to quantify how much value you're gaining from a content marketing program? No,
and it's a question that we get asked all the time as well. And I liked Peter's response about talking about measuring return on investment when it comes to content marketing, and of course podcasts are now fitting into that content marketing, about measuring trust and authority and those sort of areas, but they're intangible. And I don't have an answer to the question of how marketers grapple with this issue. They're being driven by the owners of the businesses and management to run campaigns that have a direct return on investment. But then we're hearing from content marketers that it's a slow burn and something that over time will build that trust and authority and have your business on the shopping list of consumers at some point in the future. But there's no, as you said, no instant return on investment. So I'd actually love to hear from marketers that are listening now how they respond to that question in the businesses they're working for and how they answer that question about return on investment. And are they looking at other ways of measuring it? And if they are, I'd love to hear how they're doing it.
I mean, we do have some examples, don't we, from the work we've done elsewhere at BE Media Production, from people who have sponsored podcasts for a period of time, and they know that they get a return on investment, but they know that they need to hang in there for a while. There is evidence of that.
Yeah, we had an accounting firm that was a sponsor for 12 years, which is a long time to sponsor any one thing, and they picked up a huge client during that period purely because they listened to them every month on our Business Essentials audio magazine, and so they were front of mind when that time came to make the big shift from one accounting firm to another.
And that's where Peter takes issue with GE in that, the wonderful podcast series Decoding Genius, yes, it was wonderful, but it was 6 episodes long. Mind you, in their defence, perhaps it's there for always for people to go back and listen to, and it can get amplified down the track. But his point is, and what we're talking about here, it is a long-haul game. It's something that you've got to keep at and create good quality content for audiences.
And what GE are doing in defence of GE, and not to, I guess, disagree with Peter too much, but GE do have a strong content strategy. We talked last week to Joanne Wu at GE about the fact they even have an audio strategy as well. So they're not leaving their customers high and dry when it comes to their overall content strategy. They're just producing so much. I think they sort of assume that their customers will move from video to audio to the next thing. So, and you're right, that 6-part series becomes an asset that will sit amongst GE's growing asset base when it comes to content, and is still relevant for people to listen to now as it was when they created it, 18 months ago.
Well, just as an aside, one thing I loved about talking to Peter just now was it helped me to think about all the great opportunities there are for good journalists now as they move out of mainstream, as they so often do, as they move out of mainstream journalism into perhaps, typically they might go into a comms department or into PR. Now they could go into content marketing endeavours, and a perfect fit for them. More so even than the more selly areas, more advertising-y areas that they may otherwise have gone into. So I think that's a fantastic opportunity that content marketing could pick up for people. And maybe marketers should think about that when they're looking at the team that they're putting together to work with them in their marketing departments.
As long as they don't go into podcasting and their competition for us, that's all.
No, they can come work with us. I was going to say they can come work with us. We're always looking for
talented people.
Talented journalists, absolutely. Well, I think that's it for episode 12 of Be Podcasting.
Well, I've had fun. That was good. Please invite me back again sometime.
I think we should definitely have you back in the studio on a regular basis, Heather. Very comfortable in front of the microphone, having done it for...
Don't tell me.
years. No, we won't go there again. And so that you don't miss out on future episodes, why not subscribe in Apple Podcasts or where you get your podcasts? And if you found this valuable, we'd love you to leave a review. And for more about us, you can go to be.com.au or Twitter at BEMediaProd, or drop us a line at info@be.com.au. We'd love to answer any questions you have about the world of podcasting. And again, I mentioned earlier, we'd love to hear from marketers about how they're grappling with the return on investment question in your marketing activities. We've been helping brands of all sizes create audio to communicate their messages for more than 3 decades, and we'd love to discuss working with you. From all of us at B Media Production, thanks so much for listening.
Be Podcasting is produced by the team at B Media Production. Managing Director Nick Schildberger, Executive Producer Heather Dawson, Producer Chris Ashmore, and I'm Peter Letts, Director of Audio. For more about us, go to be.com.au.